New cases of alleged Chinese academic theft are appearing in the United States amid crackdowns on Chinese espionage. There is controversy in Switzerland around a secret agreement that allows Chinese security agents to enter the country without official status in order to monitor Chinese nationals. And the strength of the relationship between China and Russia is now under question as breaks appear to be forming between the close allies. I'll be going in depth into this. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. The Justice Department announced a Chinese national and researcher at the University of California in Los Angeles has been arrested and charged for destroying evidence and obstructing an FBI investigation. The 29-year-old Guan Lei was allegedly seen throwing a damaged hard drive into a dumpster outside his apartment. The FBI recovered the damaged hard drive, which it said was irreparably damaged. Guan was prevented from boarding a flight to China after he refused an FBI request to examine his computer. Now, according to a Justice Department statement, Guan is under investigation for potentially sending sensitive U.S. software or data to China's National University of Defense Technology, and for also lying about his ties to the Chinese military in a visa application, a pattern we're beginning to see more often now. The Chinese university he was allegedly sending data to also has ties to the CCP military. The Justice Department says it is, quote, suspected of procuring U.S. origin items to develop supercomputers with nuclear explosive applications. It also notes the university was placed on the entity list of the Department of Commerce for, quote, nuclear non-proliferation reasons. And in another case announced by the Department of Justice that same day, on August 28th, a Chinese national who was conducting research at the University of Virginia was arrested and charged for theft of trade secrets and for accessing a sensitive computer without authorization. The Justice Department states that the 34-year-old Haizhou Hu was, quote, alleged to be in possession of bio-inspired research simulation software code that he was not authorized to possess, and which represented the result of years of research and resources in its development by members of the University of Virginia academic community. Hu was arrested while attempting to board a flight to China. Now, what are we seeing here? There are ongoing cases in the United States around Chinese espionage and around academic theft, especially when it comes to research and academia. Many individuals in these recent cases have been arrested at American universities. Now, it's very hard to charge someone with espionage. The amount of information you need to prove is very difficult. So a lot of times individuals seen stealing information or having connections to the Chinese military are charged on lighter charges. So for example, being charged with trying to destroy information, obstructing investigations, or trying to take information back to China. But this all ties to the broader picture of what the United States is focused on right now, which is Chinese economic theft and also the theft of research. Again, we're seeing many cases of this and a pretty steady stream of cases coming out of the Justice Department currently. And also the first case we mentioned here is important, the individual destroying this hard drive. You might remember a recent episode. We talked about these leaked documents giving orders from the Chinese Communist Party to its front operations, ordering them to begin destroying information. So this does fit into that. We can't say for sure whether it's connected, but it does fit in with that. Now, in other news, a high-profile Australian TV host, Chung Lei, has been detained in China. Lei is with the CCP's state-run CGTN news outlet, and details on her arrest are still vague, and Chinese authorities have not provided information on what's actually happening. Now, again, she's with CGTN. That's one of the Chinese Communist Party's main state-run news outlets. Now, it's important to note, in the United States, CGTN, also known as China Global Television Network, is designated as a foreign mission of the Chinese Communist Party. So not just a foreign entity, it is a foreign mission, meaning basically, in terms of designation, it is a branch of the Chinese Communist Party. It is an official branch of the Chinese system, so not really a normal news outlet. And also in context of this, yes, she's an Australian journalist, but she's also with one of the main Chinese state-run news outlets. It's not clear why the CCP would arrest one of the anchors, a prominent one, with one of its main state-run news outlets. This may point to some other changes taking place right now in terms of the CCP cracking down on its different systems of culture, entertainment, and information. We do see other cases along the lines of this. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, there has been controversy around a secret agreement that allows Chinese security agents to enter the country without official status and to then monitor Chinese nationals in that country. Under this alleged agreement between Switzerland and the CCP, the Chinese regime is able to send agents from the Chinese Ministry of Public Security to that country for up to 2 weeks without them needing official status, where they can then carry out investigations on Chinese nationals who are in the country illegally. They're allowed to conduct interrogations on Swiss soil and also work with local authorities to repatriate Chinese people. Now, it's important to note on this, many Chinese people flee China for human rights issues. Many people who are facing persecution in China have to go through many different loopholes to escape China. There are people from Hong Kong right now trying to escape to Taiwan, and the Chinese Communist Party has patrol boats looking for them. Many Chinese people try to escape China on very legitimate grounds. It doesn't mean all of them are under similar situations to that, but there are many who are. And so again, this may tie to human rights abuses and the involvement of the Swiss government in possible human rights abuses. But the Chinese Communist Party has other programs like this in other countries. In Italy, for example, Chinese police are patrolling in Rome under one of the agreements they have with the CCP. And even in the United States, the Chinese Communist Party has had programs like this, although the Trump administration has been pushing back against it. The CCP has what they called Operation Fox Hunt, where they were sending agents from the Ministry of State Security onto U.S. soil to carry out investigations and arrests of Chinese officials. There were reports on this recently, actually, from the Trump administration. The Trump administration was accusing the Chinese Communist Party of doing this on the U.S. soil, under, again, Operation Fox Hunt, where we're sending agents with the Ministry of State Security to look for Chinese officials in the United States. They were accused recently that if these agents were not able to find these individuals, they were going to their family members, urging them to turn in their family members or encourage them to commit suicide. This was recently, again, called out by the Trump administration. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party is saying it wants Czech Republican Senate Speaker Milos Vystrčil to pay a, quote, heavy price after he made an unofficial trip to Taiwan. And during a speech in Taiwan, he stated his support for the Taiwanese people and for their freedom, and declared, quote, "I am a Taiwanese," which received a standing ovation. Now, his phrase invoked former U.S. President John F. Kennedy, who told people in West Berlin back in 1963 that, quote, "I am a Berliner." For the CCP, this would be taken as an invocation of the fall of the Berlin Wall and as a hint at the collapse of the communist system in China. Afterwards, Chinese State Councilor Wang Yi criticized the Czech politician, quoted by the Foreign Ministry, stating, according to Reuters, quote, "The Chinese government and Chinese people won't take a laissez-faire attitude or sit idly by. It will make him pay a heavy price for his short-sighted behavior and political opportunism." But Czech authorities don't appear to be folding. Actually, it seems to be the opposite. Czech Foreign Minister Tomáš Petříček responded on Twitter stating that, quote, "Minister Wang's statement has crossed the line. Such strong words don't belong in relations between two sovereign countries." And again, what are we seeing here? The Chinese Communist Party has been doing this wolf warrior diplomacy. Again, they're using this hardline stance on criticizing other countries anytime they do anything that remotely offends the Chinese Communist Party. And every single time they've been doing this, just about, it has backfired. Again, when the Australian government was calling for investigations into the origin of the CCP virus, the Chinese Communist Party shot back at them and criticized them for it, and even threatened trade relations with Australia. What happened with that? Australia not only started to break away from the Chinese Communist Party, but joined this new Quad alliance against the CCP, mainly, with the United States, Japan, and India. And so things like this are having the opposite effect. Now, the Chinese Communist Party has been moving away to some extent from this wolf warrior diplomacy stance, but it seems they cannot fully break away from it. It seems in some regards they become so used to acting like this that they're still doing it. And again, this is very likely going to have the opposite effect in the Czech Republic. And now for the broader stories for today. Now, first off, the relationship between Russia and China shifted after the Cold War. The CCP, which had been formed under Soviet influence, now plays a dominant role, while Russia and its many leaders who starkly remember the old days now play the subordinate role. But as the CCP faces internal and external crisis, and as the Chinese regime is becoming more aggressive on the world stage, how long will this relationship last? The National Interest points out in a recent story some important points on this. It notes that in 2008, when both countries saw the U.S. financial crisis, the CCP had determined the decline of the United States had begun, and that it could abandon its narrative of a peaceful rise. Soon after, the Chinese Communist Party began its aggressive takeover of the South China Sea and the East China Sea. And Russia made a similar move around that same time as well, when at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, Russia also set out on a new push to assert its claims over post-Soviet regions that included Georgia and Ukraine. Now, in these claims, the United States is seen as the main impediment, and Russia and China have worked together to challenge U.S. authority at the United Nations through the BRICS bloc and through other means. So far, the report notes, Russia has been willing to keep a junior status to the CCP, which is an exception to relationships between the two countries historically. And the report also notes that tensions from the two countries are likely going to come about when the CCP pushes too far, and when Russia sees that the CCP challenges its strategic interests even more so than the United States and U.S. allies, whose only real demand from Moscow is to end its aggression. And already there are signs this break may now be happening. On one front of this, the Chinese Communist Party is unhappy about the Treaty of Beijing, where way back in 1689, the two countries adjusted their borders in favor of Russia. Recently, the Russian embassy in Beijing posted a statement celebrating the 160-year anniversary of that treaty, and the Chinese Communist Party's state-run news outlet Global Television Network shot back at that report, calling it the, quote, unequal Treaty of Beijing. And it also noted the former Chinese name of that city in that region. And since then as well, the Chinese Communist Party has hinted at other disputes with Russia, such as with historical treaties around Tajikistan and disagreements over the independence of Kazakhstan. These have caught the attention of Russia as well. Now, the broader context of this is important. When it comes right now to the Chinese Communist Party itself, Xi Jinping himself, the head of the CCP, is allegedly being called up by other top members of the CCP. This is in relation again to the recent top-level meeting they just had, this Beidaihe meeting, and also to the purges that have followed that meeting. Now, a lot of the criticism has been around Xi Jinping's different decisions when it comes to wolf warrior diplomacy, where he had this hardline diplomatic stance that has pushed away countries, for example, like India, Japan, and so on, to even align with the United States. It comes to different policies the CCP has made, again, hardline diplomatic policies, new pushes into the South and East China Seas, and also to other measures, for example, trade measures that have caused other countries to push back against the Chinese Communist Party. It seems a lot of these initiatives are having the opposite effect. They are backfiring. Xi Jinping is being accused right now by other top CCP leaders of making initiatives that are having the opposite effect, and they believe that decades of work, soft power work by the CCP, are now falling to pieces. Russia sees this happening. They're seeing the Chinese Communist Party is breaking all of its international ties, creating enemies everywhere, and that even internally it's destabilized. Also, look at the other pictures of this. Chinese Communist Party influence and subversive measures are deteriorating. A lot of its different methods when it comes to overseas work, when it comes to front operations, they are being exposed by the United States and by other countries. The U.S. Justice Department, the FBI, are looking into all the Chinese Communist Party's different methods for influencing universities. They're looking at the CCP's, say, trade theft. They're looking at different Chinese businesses, for example, when it comes to data theft and possible exposure of U.S. data to the Chinese Communist Party. They're looking at the fact that many Chinese companies operating on the stock exchange are not being held to the same auditing standards as Western companies. The Chinese Communist Party's different measures, its different soft power initiatives, and its different methods of subverting the West, all of them are being exposed, all of them are deteriorating. And so what is Russia seeing? They're seeing that one of its main allies, the Chinese Communist Party, is burning nearly all of its bridges when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to business, and when it comes to foreign influence. And for Russia as well, they remember what happened with the Soviet Union. They remember the downfall. They remember the internal fighting. They remember what happened to its economy. When the rest of the world did not see the collapse of the Soviet Union coming, these Russian individuals, many of whom still have influence in the country, knew exactly what took place behind the scenes, and very likely looking at China right now and seeing the exact same things now happening. And so what's their interest right now? Is it to align with the CCP as the Chinese Communist Party goes and makes enemies with just about every major player in the world? Or is it to, say, begin distancing from the CCP, even as the Chinese Communist Party becomes more hostile towards Russia as well with these territorial claims? This raises an important question. While the CCP's powers are diminishing, what is the interest of Russia to maintain its ties with the CCP? Would it still side with the CCP if the Chinese Communist Party is, say, separating itself from the rest of the world, dividing itself? If the CCP's different methods, different things it's been doing for decades are now deteriorating and being exposed, is it in the interest of Russia to continue siding with this? And again, when it comes to the CCP's different methods of subversion, when it comes to its territorial claims, when it comes to ideological subversion, again, Russia knows how these games are played because during the Soviet Union, Russia was doing many of the same things. It knows what the CCP is doing. When the Chinese Communist Party does these things, it not only knows exactly what it's up to, especially when it calls out Russia on these things as well, for example, these territorial disputes, but it also knows the outcome of the trajectory the CCP is on. Because again, the trajectory the CCP is on is pretty much the same things that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. They would know this above any other country. Meanwhile, the CCP's programs under the Belt and Road Initiative, this One Belt, One Road Initiative, are coming under greater scrutiny. This is as the impact of these programs are now being seen. The CCP has been doing it long enough now where countries can look and see what the results of this program are and see exactly what they've been doing. Through its programs of debt traps designed to seize resources and infrastructure, and through its use of bribes to foment corruption, the Chinese Communist Party is being accused now of subjugating third world nations. A report from the nonpartisan think tank Gatestone Institute, which focuses on international policy, says the economic benefits the CCP has brought to countries in Africa and Latin America through the program are questionable. It states, quote, "A few of these bilateral packages appear contrived to imprison already impoverished states into realms of permanent economic vassalage to China." Through the Belt and Road Initiative, the CCP benefits from commerce and from seizing local assets when the countries default on their debts. And again, these debts are done in a way where it's pretty much they're designed to not be able to be paid back. And the Chinese Communist Party has been using this as well to gain control over natural resources, including oil. And as the CCP gains deeper influence in these countries, it also gains deeper control over their political systems, often to the detriment of human rights as well. The report notes that many Islamic countries under the influence of the Belt and Road Initiative have been silent on the CCP's abuses of Muslim Uyghurs, even as the United States is considering declaring its abuses a genocide. The report notes that some Muslim countries have even praised the CCP's abuses of Muslim Uyghurs. And it also notes that, quote, "Not one Muslim-majority state voted to condemn treatment of the Uyghurs in support of the West's UN resolution to publicly sanction Beijing. Of all countries in the world, you would expect them to be at the forefront of this, and they are silent on the CCP's abuses." Meanwhile, it characterizes the Chinese regime's loan agreement under this program again as a form of racketeering. It notes, for example, that when Sri Lanka failed to meet its debt obligations under its agreement with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party used that to seize its port of Hambantota. Venezuela, for example, sends the CCP oil instead of its inflated currency. Ecuador, for example, sends about 90% of its oil to China, and the report notes, quote, "perhaps even below the world price market." And similar issues have been seen in other countries the CCP has roped in through this initiative. The report states that the ultimate goal of the Belt and Road Initiative, quote, "appears to be geared toward replacing the existing political, military, and economic dimension of the West's liberal democratic order, again, not surprisingly, with one dominated solely by the Communist Party of China." What are we seeing here? Now, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, again, this is a communist state. If the Communist Party controls the country, if you're a Communist Party member, and you have to be if you're going to be with the CCP, and if you have any influence within its political system or its business system, if your business gets big enough, you have to have a Communist Party liaison, you would have to register under the Communist Party, and possibly a lot of your employees as well would have to register under the Communist Party. If you're a Communist Party member, it means a few things. You have to pay party dues, which means you give money to the Communist Party, and you also have to join its weekly study sessions of communist texts. These people are well versed in communist doctrine. Now, part of that, what is one of the main stated goals of communism? Seize the means of production. Who controls the means of production, and what are the means of production? Well, factories. Who controls the world's factories? Natural resources. Who controls the world's natural resources? Supply chains, shipments, and so on. The Chinese Communist Party, if they do not already control it, they are making significant efforts to gain control over it. And under the One Belt, One Road initiative, again, we're seeing an active program to, again, seize the means of production, seize control of the local industries, gain control of the natural resources, and to use this initiative as an inroad. And it also uses this program as a way to build inroads into these countries, where they bring in all their critical infrastructure, basically gain control of this critical infrastructure, oftentimes when the countries default on their debts. And through these different programs, to export the CCP's form of government into these countries. Again, they gain control over the resources, they gain control over the production. Who controls the means of production? This also ties to the bigger picture of industrial warfare, when it comes to different countries competing for who controls manufacturing. Now, who controls manufacturing is the person who controls the economy. And this is important because whichever country wins the industrial war, whichever country controls the means of production, whichever country controls the global industry, is the one that controls jobs, innovation, and economy. And again, what does it mean to subjugate a country? What does it mean? What does subjugation mean historically, right? It means these countries swear allegiance to another country, they give some of their own natural resources to that country, and they follow the laws and systems of that country to an extent. The Chinese Communist Party, through its One Belt, One Road initiative, requires this of these countries if they're going to be part of it. And the Chinese Communist Party, again, is being accused of using this to bring these countries under permanent vassalage. Now, in related news, the Epoch Times recently received leaked documents from China, which show how the CCP uses organizations known as the, quote, European and American Alumni Associations as tools to use its students in its Belt and Road Initiative and for civil diplomacy. This program uses overseas students and manages the association through its United Front Work Department, which in turn is managed through the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. The official website of the Alumni Association shows it has around 42 local organizations and claims it has 220,000 members. The leaked document shows that during an association meeting back in October 2019, a member of the CCP Standing Committee in Henan, who is also the minister of the United Front Work Department, Liu Shuhua, spoke at its inaugural meeting and stated the association should continue to expand and reach more overseas students, experts, scholars, and entrepreneurs. And he also gave orders to, quote, implement the decisions from the central, provincial, and municipal party committees and take the work of overseas students as a new focus for United Front work. In August 2016, the CCP's General Office of the Central Committee published a report that was summarized by Chinascope that states the first role of the association is to, quote, establish a database of returned overseas students and receive timely updates about the returned overseas students, and then to, quote, create a think tank including the overseas students. And once this was completed, it was directed to use these networks to work on civil diplomacy and to serve the Belt and Road Initiative. What are we seeing here? The Chinese Communist Party is using these overseas students in its United Front work programs. And it's also taking these students, monitoring them, and using them to organize think tanks, according to these documents and also previous reports we've seen on this. It can then use these think tanks to influence the local politics and to benefit its different interests, in this case, the One Belt, One Road Initiative. And important on this as well, it says it has 220,000 members. 220,000, including overseas students, experts, scholars, and entrepreneurs. This means very likely 220,000 people involved in the CCP program operating overseas or operating under the CCP's interest to subjugate and influence other countries. Also, on a nicer note, we received a very nice letter from Senator Rick Scott. It says here, quote, Joshua, thanks for talking about problems of communist China, Rick. So Senator, if you're watching, thank you very much. We appreciate the support. Now folks, on another note, we've been having some odd anomalies that appear to be censorship on YouTube. We've had audience members contact us about our videos not being watchable for about 24 hours after they're published, and there's been other issues like this. Now, on another note, it does seem that our videos are being monetized again, which is nice to see, but again, we've been hearing other odd anomalies with our channel. If you've been seeing any of this, if you've experienced anything like this, please contact us. If you see anything like this again, also take screenshots and let us know. We would appreciate it. With that said, folks, we're again broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Also, if you want to support us, please join us on Patreon. You can find the link to that in the description below. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow. As always, also, if you want to go the extra mile, please tell a friend or family member about Crossroads. Now, with that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.